spies, secrets, and espionage. Inside the CIA and KGB, the Cold War was fought largely without armies meeting on open battlefields, yet it shaped the lives of billions and brought humanity repeatedly to the edge of annihilation. Beneath the speeches, treaties, and military posturing existed a deeper conflict conducted in silence. Intelligence agencies became the frontline forces of this hidden war, tasked not only with observing the enemy, but with manipulating history itself. The creation of the CIA and the evolution of the KGB transformed espionage from a peripheral activity into the central mechanism through which global power was exercised. The roots of modern American intelligence emerged from failure. The attack on Pearl Harbor exposed catastrophic gaps in U.S. intelligence coordination. Information existed, but it was fragmented, ignored, and poorly analyzed. In response, the United States restructured its intelligence system, culminating in the National Security Act of 1947 and the creation of the CIA. Its mandate extended far beyond espionage. It was authorized to conduct covert operations, influence foreign governments, and shape global outcomes without public accountability. The Soviet Union approached intelligence from an entirely different historical tradition. From the Bolshevik Revolution onward, secrecy and surveillance were central to state survival. The Cheka, NKVD, and later the KGB were instruments of both external defense and internal control. When the KGB was formally established in 1954, it inherited decades of experience in repression, counterintelligence, and ideological enforcement. Unlike the CIA, the KGB did not merely serve the state, it enforced the political system itself. This fundamental difference shaped how both agencies operated. The CIA functioned in a society where secrecy conflicted with democratic transparency, creating tension between covert action and public oversight. The KGB operated in a system where secrecy was absolute and dissent criminalized. Its reach extended into every aspect of Soviet life, from factories to universities, from military units to private apartments. Surveillance was not an exception. It was normality. Espionage during the Cold War depended primarily on human intelligence. Despite advances in technology, nothing replaced the value of a trusted source inside enemy institutions. Recruiting agents required patience, psychological insight, and exploitation of human weakness. Intelligence officers learned to identify ambition, resentment, fear, and ideology as entry points. Spies were not superheroes. They were ordinary people placed under extraordinary pressure. The CIA's early efforts to penetrate the Soviet Union were largely unsuccessful. Soviet society was closed, suspicious, and heavily monitored. Western agents stood out, and many operations ended in arrest or compromise. As a result, the CIA increasingly relied on allies, defectors, and technological intelligence to compensate for its lack of human sources behind the Iron Curtain. The KGB, by contrast, achieved remarkable success infiltrating Western institutions. Its most devastating victories came not through dramatic operations, but through long-term ideological recruitment. The Cambridge Five demonstrated how deeply Soviet intelligence penetrated the British establishment. Their access allowed Moscow to anticipate Western strategy, neutralize operations, and manipulate diplomatic outcomes for decades. The exposure of these spies created lasting damage. Trust within Western intelligence agencies collapsed. Internal vetting became obsessive. Careers were destroyed based on suspicion alone. The psychological impact of betrayal extended beyond security. It reshaped institutional culture, making intelligence agencies increasingly inward-looking and risk-averse. Surveillance technology expanded dramatically as both sides attempted to compensate for human vulnerability. Wiretapping, radio interception, and electronic monitoring became routine. Embassies were treated as hostile territory. Diplomats assumed they were constantly observed. Even the most secure rooms were compromised, reinforcing the belief that absolute secrecy was impossible. Covert operations soon went beyond intelligence collection into direct intervention. The CIA orchestrated regime changes, funded opposition movements, and manipulated elections across the developing world. These operations were justified as necessary to contain communism, yet they often produced long-term instability, resentment, and blowback that undermined American credibility. The KGB mirrored these tactics, supporting revolutionary movements, training insurgents, and exporting Soviet influence through proxy conflicts. Intelligence became inseparable from foreign policy. Espionage no longer simply informed decisions. It shaped them, often without public knowledge or consent. Double agents emerged as the most dangerous actors in this environment. They weaponized trust, turning intelligence agencies against themselves. The fear of infiltration became constant. Every success was questioned. Every failure was suspect. Paranoia became institutionalized, weakening effectiveness while reinforcing secrecy. Behind the ideology and strategy were individuals whose lives were consumed by deception. Many agents lived under false identities for decades. Personal relationships were strategic liabilities. Emotional detachment was necessary for survival. The intelligence services offered purpose, but little protection once usefulness ended. By the mid-Cold War, espionage had become self-perpetuating. Intelligence agencies justified their power through the threats they uncovered, while secrecy prevented meaningful evaluation of their actions. The shadow war expanded endlessly, driven by fear rather than strategy. This was the world the CIA and KGB created together, a system where information was power, truth was fragmented, and history unfolded as much in secret files as on public stages. And it was only beginning. The Cold War reached its height in the 1960s, a period defined not only by open crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis, but by the invisible war waged in the shadows. Intelligence agencies were operating at unprecedented scale, and both the CIA and KGB invested heavily in human and technological resources. The stakes were immense. One misstep could trigger nuclear escalation, yet the world largely remained unaware of the conflicts playing out in living rooms, embassies, and hidden safe houses. One of the most dramatic examples of espionage was the U-2 incident of 1960. A CIA pilot, Francis Gary Powers, flying a reconnaissance mission over Soviet territory, was shot down, exposing the U.S. surveillance program. The incident embarrassed the United States diplomatically, increased Soviet paranoia, and underscored the risks of aerial intelligence gathering. It demonstrated how a single operation could reshape global politics overnight. Double agents continued to be the most destabilizing figures in intelligence circles. Aldrich Ames, working inside the CIA in the 1980s, compromised nearly all of America's spies inside the USSR. Over several years, he provided the KGB with names, locations, and mission details, resulting in arrests and executions. Similarly, Oleg Gordievsky, a high-ranking KGB officer, secretly spied for Britain's MI6, supplying the West with critical insights into Soviet strategies and intentions. The use of double agents created a climate of intense paranoia. Every officer was scrutinized. Communication was fragmented. The very networks designed to protect nations often became instruments of suspicion. In some cases, loyalty itself became suspect, undermining the effectiveness of entire intelligence operations. Covert technology played an increasingly central role. The CIA pioneered satellite reconnaissance programs, including the Corona Project, which captured photographic intelligence from space. These early spy satellites allowed the United States to monitor Soviet missile deployments, providing data crucial for nuclear deterrence. Meanwhile, the KGB developed advanced bugging techniques, miniature cameras, and radio interception tools to surveil foreign embassies and domestic targets. Assassinations and covert operations further blurred the lines between intelligence and war. Both agencies developed plans for targeted eliminations, sometimes with far-reaching consequences. The CIA's attempts against Fidel Castro included explosives-laden cigars and poisoned diving suits. The KGB orchestrated similar covert operations against defectors and perceived traitors abroad, maintaining a climate of constant fear. The intelligence agencies were also deeply involved in ideological warfare. The CIA funded media outlets, political parties, and anti-communist organizations around the world to undermine Soviet influence. The KGB responded with disinformation campaigns designed to confuse, mislead, and manipulate populations in the West. False narratives were planted in newspapers, letters, and even academic journals to shape public perception without detection. Berlin became the epicenter of espionage activity in Europe. Spies, double agents, and surveillance operatives filled the city, monitoring movements across the Iron Curtain. Safe houses, dead drops, and clandestine meeting points were scattered throughout both East and West Berlin. Ordinary streets were theaters of intelligence conflict, where a single misstep could end a career or a life. Nuclear crises heightened the stakes of espionage. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, intelligence reports from the CIA and U-2 flights informed U.S. decisions that prevented full-scale war. At the same time, the Soviets relied on KGB assessments to gauge American intentions. Intelligence failures or misinterpretations could, and nearly did, trigger a global catastrophe, illustrating the life-or-death stakes of covert knowledge. The Cold War's intelligence operations also shaped scientific and technological advancement. Both sides sought to steal nuclear secrets, missile designs, and aerospace innovations. Soviet agents penetrated Western research programs, while the CIA monitored Soviet technological developments. Espionage accelerated the arms race, as each side sought to outpace the other, sometimes relying more on stolen knowledge than domestic innovation. Training for intelligence officers became increasingly sophisticated. Both agencies created schools dedicated to espionage techniques, languages, and psychological manipulation. Agents practiced surveillance detection, escape, and clandestine communication. The CIA developed the famed Farm Training Center in Virginia, while the KGB trained its recruits in remote facilities designed to simulate foreign environments. Spies were hardened for years-long undercover operations. Human intelligence remained vital, despite technological advances. Agents cultivated relationships over months or years, gaining access to sensitive information. The personal risk was immense. Capture often meant torture or execution. The psychological burden was heavy, with many spies developing multiple identities, living fragmented lives and never fully trusting even colleagues or family. The disinformation campaigns of the era were often subtle and insidious. The KGB infiltrated media organizations to promote narratives favorable to Soviet policy. The CIA created covert publications to counter communist influence in key nations. These operations were not designed to win hearts and minds directly. They were intended to create uncertainty, confusion, and mistrust, shaping political outcomes indirectly. By the 1980s, espionage was a fully institutionalized component of global power. The intelligence war became self-reinforcing, with each side justifying secrecy through fear of the other. Human spies, technological tools, and covert operations were integrated into national strategy. The Cold War's invisible battles were as consequential as any conventional war, influencing diplomacy, economics, and military readiness around the world. As the Soviet Union weakened and the Eastern Bloc began to fracture, intelligence agencies confronted a world in flux. Defections increased, networks collapsed, and secrecy was suddenly less valuable than adaptability. The CIA, KGB, and allied services scrambled to reinterpret their missions in a rapidly changing global landscape. The era of espionage that had dominated the Cold War for decades was approaching its conclusion, but its consequences would endure. By the late 1980s, the world of espionage was confronting profound transformation. The Soviet Union was in economic and political decline, ideological rigidity was weakening, and populations across Eastern Europe were increasingly restless. Intelligence agencies, which had thrived in a world of rigid confrontation, suddenly found themselves navigating uncertainty. Long-standing operations and networks were disrupted, while agents trained for decades-long missions faced abrupt irrelevance or new assignments in a rapidly evolving global landscape. High-profile defections illustrated this shift vividly. KGB officers such as Oleg Gordievsky and Vitaly Yurchenko provided unprecedented insights into Soviet intelligence, exposing secrets that had shaped international policy for decades. Each defection was a propaganda victory for the West and a morale blow to the KGB, highlighting the vulnerability of even the most tightly controlled intelligence apparatus. For the CIA, these defections confirmed the enduring value of human intelligence over technology alone. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the ultimate failure of the Iron Curtain and the limitations of the intelligence systems designed to uphold it. The collapse revealed how surveillance, secrecy, and coercion could not indefinitely sustain a political order when popular support evaporated. Agencies that had invested in decades of espionage were suddenly forced to confront the unpredictability of human action on a massive scale. As communist governments across Eastern Europe fell, the CIA and allied Western agencies faced the task of reorienting their focus. Former Eastern Bloc operatives were either co-opted into new roles, recruited as informants on residual networks, or abandoned entirely. For the KGB, the crisis was existential. Its very structure, tied intimately to the Communist Party, was disintegrating. By 1991, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the KGB ceased to exist in its original form, replaced by successor agencies with narrower mandates. The human cost of decades-long espionage became clearer in this period. Agents, double agents, and informants had endured immense psychological strain. Many had lived double lives for years, raising families under false pretenses, unable to reveal their identities. Others faced imprisonment, execution, or social ostracism. The Cold War's invisible battles had claimed lives quietly, leaving stories that would only emerge decades later. Legacy operations continued even as political landscapes shifted. Technology developed for Cold War purposes, satellite reconnaissance, signal interception, and covert communications, was adapted to new intelligence challenges, from terrorism to organized crime. Many of the techniques pioneered by the CIA and KGB would shape modern intelligence for decades, influencing counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and global surveillance initiatives. The Cold War also left behind lessons in ethical ambiguity. Covert operations, assassinations, and psychological manipulation had often crossed moral lines. The CIA's involvement in regime changes, or the KGB's support for foreign insurgencies, created consequences that outlived their immediate political objectives. Entire nations experienced upheaval, and the shadow of foreign interference continues to resonate in modern geopolitics.
Double agents remain central to historical analysis. Figures like Aldrich Ames, Kim Philby, and Oleg Gordievsky demonstrated how trust could be weaponized. The information they controlled had the power to alter the fate of nations, to tip negotiations, or to precipitate crisis. Their stories illustrate the delicate balance between loyalty, ideology, and personal ambition in the high-stakes world of espionage. The intelligence war had also fundamentally reshaped diplomacy. Leaders of both the United States and the Soviet Union relied on intelligence assessments to guide policy. Misinterpretations could escalate tensions, as seen during the Cuban Missile Crisis or NATO-Soviet standoffs. Spies, in effect, influenced history not from the front lines, but from offices, safe houses, and communication lines invisible to the public. Espionage fostered a culture of secrecy that extended beyond the agencies themselves. Governments routinely withheld information from their citizens, justified in the name of national security. Public understanding of events was filtered through the lens of classified information, creating historical gaps and ongoing debates over accountability, ethics, and transparency. The psychological legacy of espionage is equally profound. Agents endured isolation, deception, and constant suspicion, often for decades. The necessity of concealment reshaped identity, loyalty, and interpersonal relationships. Even after the Cold War ended, former operatives grappled with the emotional toll of lives spent in shadows, many never fully reintegrating into normal society. The dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War marked not just a political transformation, but the conclusion of an era in intelligence. The CIA, KGB, and allied services had defined international relations for nearly half a century. Yet their triumphs, failures, and excesses are inseparable from the broader story of the Cold War itself, revealing both the power and the peril of hidden knowledge. Ultimately, the era of Cold War espionage illustrates a fundamental truth. Intelligence can shape history, but it cannot control it. Human action, societal pressure, and unforeseen events consistently disrupted even the most elaborate plans. The CIA and KGB succeeded in influencing outcomes, delaying crises, and gathering unparalleled information, but they never fully commanded the world they sought to manage from the shadows. Today, the lessons of Cold War espionage resonate across the globe. Former spies, defector accounts, and declassified archives continue to inform policy, literature, and popular understanding. The tactics, strategies, and psychological pressures that defined this period laid the foundation for modern intelligence practices, highlighting the enduring relevance of secrecy, surveillance, and human judgment in international affairs. The Cold War's hidden war ended not with a single battle, but with a collapse of belief, ideology, and control. Spies did not win or lose in the traditional sense. Their victories were often invisible, their failures catastrophic, and their influence enduring. In the end, the world they operated in, full of secrets, lies, and unseen conflicts, was as much a creation of their work as the political structures they served. And so, the story of the CIA and KGB, of double agents, covert operations, and secret wars concludes as a testament to the power of information, the fragility of trust, and the extraordinary human cost of a conflict fought in shadows. Though the Cold War ended decades ago, its echoes still shape global intelligence, national security, and the way societies understand secrecy, loyalty, and power.